Hello and welcome to my instructional technology final. I'm so excited to share my research findings with you, as well as the things that I learned about myself as an educator along the way. I'm first going to start by talking about my problem statement. My problem statement was understanding why English language learners' motivations and engagement in reading comprehension, vocabulary deficiencies, and utilizing technology in positive ways to develop skills. I am an English language arts teacher to 7th and 8th graders, and a majority of my students are English language learners. As a teacher who is very educated in ways that I can support my English language learners, I am trying to make the best informed instructional decisions. The problem that I'm looking at here, though, is with last year's COVID and students missing out on learning, and along with teachers who are not equipped with the resources, support, and knowledge to make informed instructional decisions, as the number of diverse students from different populations with different languages is increasing. So not only is this negatively affecting students' conversational versus their academic language capabilities, but it is also impacting them in every single content area. Specifically for my project, I'm looking at engagement in English content area. But, however, it's important to think about how it's also impacting the way that we as teachers are providing the materials to our students and how we are engaging them with different strategies as they acquire more of the English language learning, as well as targeted enrichments that are going to improve students' overall reading comprehension and vocabulary deficiencies. So, as a teacher, it's good to not be closed up in a box when thinking about the strategies you are going to provide, but providing new research-based strategies that are going to allow students to see the value in their learning. Reading comprehension, word study, and vocabulary acquisition opportunities has to be at the forefront of applying a solution to ensure that our students are receiving the best instruction that is going to propel them forward as learners and allow them to have opportunities to be their best selves in our classrooms. In my research, I specifically looked at how movement and technology, along with specific activities, are going to increase engagement as students try to build their reading and vocabulary comprehension. So with the research, I found that there was greater retention with the more interactive activities for students. Engagement, which is characterized as affective, creative, interactive, shared, sustained, and personalized, reflects a deep involvement in text. We must, as educators, be specific and well-informed in our practices. Explicit cognitive strategy and vocabulary instruction with the use of modeling and guided practice allows students to organize their information, ask themselves tough questions about the text that they're reading, allows students to collaborate with reading and writing, and allows us as educators to be explicitly teaching our students those big concepts and ideas that are providing that reading comprehension and other forms of literacy achievement. We must, as teachers, be aware, though, of the authentic ways that we can incorporate movement. These real-world learning opportunities are not only essential, but they're also going to be a framework that helps us with our instructional decision-making as teachers. So with all my research, the biggest thing that I found was that engagement and movement are interconnected. They impact students significantly. When students are up collaborating, talking about the learning, they're making those connections to their real lives, which allows them to extend the learning beyond the classroom. It allows them to know, are they making an implicit inference or are they making an explicit inference that they can put their finger on right there in text? We're asking our students to ask themselves deeper questions so that they can allow the text to be relevant to their life, their experiences, as well as having them evaluate and react to the presented information. We must provide those opportunities for students to really interact with a broader social and cultural context. So the way that I thought I would do this would be to give my students different experiences, rather than just hand them a worksheet and say, hey, this is what you're doing today. My implementation plans went very smooth. I would say out of all my class periods, there was one of my class periods who struggled more than the others, only because they're a very social group. So thinking about my expectations and procedures, it was really important for me to be very transparent in the ways that I was going to handle misbehaviors and the ways that I was going to handle those bumps in the road. But basically, my middle schoolers did very well with turning and talking to their peers, connecting their learning to broader context. So you can see that I was very specific in the plans that I had laid out for day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. I allowed my students to start with me on building background knowledge, and then I released the grip on their learning because I let them have ownership over them taking the learning into their own hands and teaching it to the class. And I really think when students have the opportunity to teach something to the class, they learn it deeper. And they really understand how important it is to be reflecting and evaluating a resource. So an artifact that I thought was extremely necessary to show was the Nearpod vocabulary activity. So before students read a text during this implementation plan, they were pre-taught vocabulary explicitly. This meant that I let my students stand up, walk around, collaborate with their peers, as well as participating on their one-to-one laptop devices. So before we started anything, the students first did a matching activity where they had to match the word to the picture, and if you click on the picture on Nearpod, it tells them the definition. I generally find that the Nearpod vocabulary activities allow for my students to be more receptive and expressive in their language, and it also allows them to be held accountable for participating because their names are on their Nearpod sign-in, so they are thinking about it, they are posting, and the Nearpod collaborative board is one of my favorite sources because it allows students to post on the wall using the word they just learned in a sentence, which then therefore allows for all their classmates to see their examples. And then we usually take some time to discuss the examples that my students came up with. How fun for them. Here is my implementation plan for week 3. My students were looking at their learnings with a KWL chart, which basically means it's a know what learn chart to look at what they didn't know before they learned what they knew. So I would say my strengths of the plan were backwards planning. Backwards planning is my best friend with this unit, so I thought it was super important that everything was organized with a daily purpose for learning. My students were told exactly what it was expected of them. They were held to high standards. The vocabulary instruction that I did with my students was very focused and diverse with the text we were reading to really represent different populations. And I believe I was more flexible in my expectations for my students because my students, this was new for them. To be participating and standing up and moving around was something that we hadn't done before when teaching vocab. I would say the weaknesses of my plan were some classroom management reminders. Yes, I have a classroom management rule in place, but this implementation plan was very rigorous. It made my students have to really think cognitively before they could just do anything. Meeting due date deadlines. A lot of my students were not used to having a lot of deadlines to meet before the end of the period, but since my students were working collaboratively, that really helped with that issue. A lot of my texts that I used were very high level compared to what my students were used to. And I think just being comfortable with being uncomfortable learning was something that my students were not used to. Because we, as human beings, never want to be uncomfortable, do we? But it is through the uncomfortable experiences where we really learn about ourselves and we learn how to use what we are learning in our real lives. My project findings consisted of student engagement going up significantly. My students were excited. The classroom community was engaged. Certain students got to work with other students that they've never talked to or worked with before. A lot of my students who were quiet decided to participate and really speak and let their voices be heard. I felt like a lot of my students got to show off their strengths as learners in new ways. I found that My management system is definitely one that needs to stay just as structured, because when students sometimes do new activities in my classroom, they think the rules don't apply. So I think it's really interesting that I have to be aware of explaining the expectations every single day so my students know exactly what to do. I also found out that Nearpod and all the other technologies like Canvas and vocabulary.com really do serve as a accountability tool, which shows that students need to get their work done. And if they don't, a lot of my students were like, oh, Miss Sheehy, I better get to work and I better figure it out, so I can stay on track. My AIP process. So it was a great process for me to identify the problem in my current classroom. I feel that this class has made me think more deeply about what I can do in my best practices. I feel like it has made me look at my curriculum and really take in the diversities of my students. And I love how this project was positively solution-based focused. It wasn't just a rant of negative things happening. It was very positive, happy. The technology focus was fun to see what my students were doing. And it really helped me reflect each and every day. When I got done with school, when I got done with the class period, I would really think, what went well today? What did not go so well? And what can I do to support my people? So before I exit out, I just really wanted to emphasize the importance of professional development for me specifically, and doing this research and taking this class and really valuing the process of building comprehension in students. Because I know as a teacher, it isn't always the most fun thing in the world for students to try new things that make them uncomfortable. I know from being a teacher that vocabulary recognition and reading comprehension take time. The process is a long process sometimes. And we as educators must stay recent on our research findings. We must stay energized with the way that we present information. We must look up new strategies. We must be willing to try new activities in our classroom, even if we're nervous about specific things of our class makeup not working out. We must be willing to take those risks and to really differentiate in a meaningful way. Throughout this project, I just really was realizing how important it is as a teacher to be exposing kids and students to the most valuable parts of learning, and to really push them and challenge them to be their best selves. So, ending my 522 instructional presentation, I just wanted to say that this AIP process is something that I will definitely take into account as I continue to enhance and think about what I can do to be the best educator I can be. Thank you.